Hi there, and welcome to the first Digital Jam session. On this session today, we have Peter Robinson. You can catch him at Peter Robinson81 on Twitter. And we have Gabby at Huckletree, is her Twitter if you want to catch her there. Morning, guys.
Morning.
Morning.
So today, we wanted to have a quick chat about two very different areas. And the first one is new startups and entrepreneurship and the digital space. And the second area we're going to be talking about is kids brands and the general area of youth in this space. So, what we wanted to start with, and Pete, you're kind of out of the loop on this one because Gabby and I were just gossiping and you were too slow. We're going to be talking about three really interesting people who are under the age of 25, who've started up their own businesses, and what we feel about the notion that youth and age is really just a number now when it comes to entrepreneurship, and the way that the next generation are approaching business and startup. So the three people that we were going to kind of take a look at and talk about was specifically the founder of Sumly, Nick, whose surname I can't pronounce, and I hope somebody else can pronounce it, D'Aliosio, at the tender age of 18, who's gone on to sell or be acquired by Yahoo, and is now helping Yahoo with their newsfeed. We have Evan Spiegel at 23, CEO and founder of Snapchat, and we all know what happened with Snapchat. And Palmer Luckey at the age of 21, founder of Oculus VR, and again, we all know what happened with Oculus VR and Facebook. So, Gabby, I'll open the floor to you in terms of what you think is happening in terms of trends for young people getting into digital startup.
Well, it's really interesting actually, Tanya, because I recently read a statistic that said that 80,000 university students in the UK have their own business currently whilst at university. And that's a huge number when you think that these people are actually studying for their degrees at the same time. And I just thought that that really highlights, you know, how many young people now are focusing more and more on starting their business. And I just found it very encouraging.
It's interesting that you mentioned this, actually. There is an organisation called the New Entrepreneurs Foundation based out of London, just over the road from your good selves, in fact, Gabby, where a lot of the entrants are young people who have paid their way through university and college by actually starting their own businesses, which makes me feel frighteningly underachieving. But I definitely think that there is an emerging trend in this area. I mean, what would you say on this, Pete?
I think it's fascinating. It's really, really scary as a recruiter when you have, these 21, 22-year-olds coming in for interviews and they've achieved more in their life than you have already. You know, they've already set something up and failed and tried something else and got, a good reach with it. I met a kid called Zach Marks who set up Grom Social, which I think's got about 800,000 people on it. It's a kind of a social network, virtual world over in the States. And this guy is, he's a champion surfer. He's coding himself. He's teaching himself all these different skills, and he's doing it with all the tools that are available. And I think that's one thing that's really interesting right now, is that rather than kind of trying to aspire to be something massive, kids are just taking really small steps, really modest steps to kind of find something they're interested in. That for me is like a thing that's shifted over the last 2 or 3 years.
It's interesting there that you mentioned about tools and the kind of resources out there in this modern day and age. Do we think that the evolving nature of modern technology, devices, social, the internet, all of these things, the internet of everything, do we think that these things are really part of what's facilitating the youth in terms of entrepreneurship, or do we think this is a fundamental change in the cultural attitude of young people to feel that they can just have a go?
I would say both.
I would say
Sorry,
both
Gab.
as well. Yeah, no, I'm agreeing with you.
Definitely. I love it when everybody agrees. So Pete, in terms of really interesting brands who are doing really interesting things with or for kids, obviously there's people like Hopster, and YouTube Kids has just been launched. What do you think at the moment are the most interesting projects or new and emerging things that are happening right now that are worth noting?
I think in the tech space, and I think we spoke about this before, Tanya, once, about wearables, and it being less about wearables that try to do everything and more about wearables that have a specific function in life. And I think for me, like the tech things that are interesting are the things that do one thing really well. And Hopster is a really good example of that, and should be able to compete in a market where YouTube Kids exist, because they stand for a really clear message. And I think that's the important thing from a tech perspective, is just saying we do one thing really, really well.
So what's your view then on something like Osmo?
Do you know what? I haven't actually spent a lot of time thinking about Osmo, so I might not be the best to answer that one. That's probably not the answer you want from me. I looked at it in a study recently, and we trialed it with we trialed the concept with a few kids and looking at different things there. And that sort of thing I think is interesting, but it isn't something that I have a huge amount of experience on. I was going to say, certainly the idea of kind of physical and digital coming together seems really sensible. And one of the things that we've seen is like the way, and we always talk about, is digital changing the way kids develop? I don't think it is, but there are some little things happening from a dexterity perspective, like kids being able to drag things with two fingers and move things at a younger age because they're used to doing it on a tablet. So I think like how digital and physical interact is going to become really interesting in the future.
No, I was just going to tell you a really cute little anecdote. I saw an advert recently of a little kid who must have been no more than 2 years old going up to a TV screen and trying to enlarge it with his two fingers. And I just thought that was telling of the time that we're living in.
That's quite funny. I remember somebody once commenting on something very similar, where a baby had a magazine and was flipping it and was trying to swipe the pages with their finger. Yeah. And this notion that we're hard coding, the next generation.
But that kind of pinching of the screen is really interesting, because that's not something that a 2-year-old historically, from a dexterity perspective, would really be able to do. So the fact that actually changing a development perspective from a kid's angle is really, really interesting.
Is anybody worried? I mean, I know that there are obviously so many benefits to all these great programs, learning programs and e-programs and great cartoons that are developed for kids. But is anybody worried that spending so much time with these products and devices may kind of inhibit their development in other departments?
I don't think anyone really knows right now. So we're doing a study with the University of Sheffield and CBeebies and Andrew McIntosh, who's one of the Teletubbies guys, and we're looking at 0 to 5's use of mobile and tablets. Specifically looking at a lot of education and social elements, but actually looking at what is the impact on the child. And I think there's a few studies out there, and there's obviously lots of Daily Mail headlines out there. But generally, I don't think it's something that we quite know the answer to yet. There's definitely benefits, and we're seeing the benefits. And there are negatives in terms of temper tantrums and kids smashing iPhones because the music's out of sync with a game or whatever. So there are certain things, but I don't think long term we know how it changes kids' education.
So I have a curveball to throw at you guys. So we're talking kids, and we're talking, on devices and, entertainment being developed for kids. What's the sentiment in terms of microtransaction? Because this is a real, controversial discussion when it comes to, should we really be charging microtransaction for young content or for, youth applications?
People have to get paid. And I think... when we go and talk to parents, they are comfortable, and this is different because it depends on what age the child becomes part of the purchase decision or the purchase manipulation. And I think if we talk to parents and they think the transaction is fair and they've got value from it, then I don't think there's a problem. So even if it's a microtransaction, as long as it's clear, what the benefit of that microtransaction is, or any in-app purchasing or any freemium model or anything else, I think as long as it's fair and clear, then parents and kids seem comfortable with it. I think it's when it's a little more discreet or a little underhand that's where there is an issue. And generally, when you look at the kids app market, there are there's much more premium products because kids are I think parents are now starting to see that you can get real benefit from digital. So actually paying, you know, to subscribe to something like Hopster or paying for a Tokaboka app or something like that is a benefit to the child.
Okay. So you heard it here first. So there is nothing to worry about, people. But
As long as
Gabby,
everyone's fair.
as long as everybody is being fair and transparent.
Yeah.
So Gabby, in terms of new startups, obviously you're at Huckletree and you're seeing, you know, lots of really interesting new startups kind of coming through your space,
Yeah.
or collaborating with your hub. Do you see any particular trends emerging in terms of what types of startups are coming through your doors?
I do. We've recently been seeing quite a few really interesting recruitment-based startups, so different software helping people recruit. And I think that that really is an industry that's in need, has been in need of disruption. So it makes me very happy to see, you know, these new developments. In terms of verticals, we see a lot of fintech startups, which is also really interesting. I think these waves kind of come and go in kind of batches of a couple of months, and something else maybe kind of becomes the focus for a while. But there are definitely trends, and it's definitely very interesting to follow them and to see what's going on. When we go to the demo days, we see a lot of startups that are dealing specifically with data.
Mm-hmm.
Another really interesting area as well.
Okay, so I was really interested in understanding from your perspectives what you feel like the landscape of your particular industry is. So Pete, maybe if we start with you, just in terms of, I know that you guys go to things like Kids Screen and you know, the Children's Media Conference and what have you. Is there anything really significant that you think is coming down the pipeline that maybe we haven't quite heard about just yet, or you know, something that you think is kind of, you know, looking into your crystal ball, this is what you think is going to be happening?
So we're three quick things. I guess virtual reality. So the Oculus, and also when virtual reality goes more and more mobile, I think that's really, really interesting, really, really immersive, and we're looking at that a lot at the moment. I think, and this is nothing new, but I think UGC and creativity. I think that's a huge trend for the digital industry. Is how do you use great narrative to encourage creativity? And the third thing, and we kind of touched on it already, is the payment side of things. I think now people are becoming more comfortable paying for digital content, and I think that's going to be a really interesting thing to see what happens there over the next 12 months. So that's definitely interesting. I think the interesting thing from that, an interesting angle from a traditional perspective, is that people now expect to get content for free or without commitment. And what does that mean for the people who have traditional payment subscription models, for example? So I think that's really interesting.
Interesting. You mentioned UGC, and it's just a thought that I'm kind of interested to hear your opinions on. But UGC and well, more specifically around crowdfunding and young audiences, whether that is crowdfunded projects with an audience that are young people under the age of 13, or crowdfunding by young people under the age of 13. What's the sentiment? Is crowdfunding the right place for under 13 projects?
I think it is. But it has to be safe. It has to be safe, obviously. I think it has to be well managed. But I'm really interested in areas like that. I think that when I meet kids that are 9 and 10 years old and they're coming up with, I always remember an 11-year-old that we met in New York who was teaching himself Japanese so he could go to Japan. Oh, so he could go to Japan when he was 16 because he collected everything Pokemon. And and when you start meeting 11-year-olds like that and thinking, actually, the way they're kind of planning their future and thinking about, he's already saving for flights to Japan, and, so really, really complex thoughts. And now you meet 11, 12-year-olds who have business plans for how they're going to make money out of YouTube. I think that's a really interesting thing to explore. And yeah, I think it is. I just think it needs to be done properly.
You just reminded me of that kid, and for some reason I thought he was 13. If he was 11, that's even more scary in my memory.
I think he's 11
now.
or 12. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. He's a cool kid.
He was a frighteningly scary kid. Gabby, in terms of your thoughts on the future landscape for entrepreneurship and for new startup.
I mean, I really think, I think at the moment, as we all know, we're in a day and age where there's never been as much entrepreneurship or as many startups as there are today. I really only see this continuing to develop and continuing to become the norm. They say that over half of the millennial generation have their own business or are looking to start their own business, which I also find really interesting. But I think specifically in terms of co-working, I see, there are a lot of players coming into the shared office industry, and I think that that's going to force the existing players to really refine what they're offering and to take their sense of community further, to offer more services, and perhaps even to, spaces for specific verticals is going to be what the trend will be.
It's interesting you mentioned this because Playhubs has just opened over at Somerset House here in London, and they are dedicated specifically to the games industry. So perhaps that's the emerging trend happening as we speak.
Yeah, it's very possible, and I think then the question really is we're living in a collaborative economy, and how is having co-working spaces dedicated specifically to specific industries, is that more or less conducive to collaboration? I think that's quite an interesting question, which I have my own thoughts on. But
so, out of interest, there's two questions I want to ask you. First of all, in terms of the proportion of females that you're seeing in the startup environment and in kind of co-work spaces like yours, are you seeing a good proportion of females within that kind of environment?
I am, but I'm always quite disappointed that men still are the vast majority, not only in kind of, at Huckletree or at other co-working spaces, also specifically when we go to pitch days or demo days, and 95% of the people up there pitching are men. At Huckletree, we actually endeavour to keep the balance quite well balanced. So if there comes a moment where we have too many men, we specifically try and find women to come and take the available spaces. But it is difficult. I think that women, especially at Huckletree, the women tend to be the kind of freelancers, whereas the startups tend to be led by men still. So I think we still have some way to go on that.
Okay, and secondly, in follow-up, I'm curious to understand where you think the future of co-workspace is going, whether or not you can see in its future a junior version of a co-workspace, something that really allows for junior entrepreneurship.
I mean, I think that's definitely really important. I think, previously it was places like the university library where people would kind of work from and stuff, and that definitely needs to be developed, especially if, people are starting their own businesses as opposed to going to university now. So yes, I think that definitely, as in the following years, we'll see more and more younger entrepreneurs, and therefore the need for more spaces for them. And I also think that those spaces will need to be quite different from the traditional co-working spaces in what they offer, perhaps in what they look like, and obviously definitely in terms of their community as well.
Segregation or collaboration with the existing communities? What's your opinion on that?
I think definitely collaboration. I mean, like I said, I think, that this collaborative economy that we're living in is only going to develop more and more. And I don't think there are many boundaries to that. I think what's interesting also is exactly what we were saying earlier, is that now, you can be in a meeting between a millennial or somebody who is of university age and somebody who is, 10, 15, 20, however many years older. And often the millennial has as much or perhaps even more experience than the person who's older than them. So I think definitely, this collaborative economy is just going to continue to grow and develop. And that's something to look forward to, I think.
Wonderful. So just in closing, because I know that you guys are really on the finger on the pulse of all things that are relevant to your industry. So last shout out to any projects or really interesting happenings that you think deserve a quick platform of discussion.
I'll start. As we were talking about earlier, Tanya, about Why Niche, I think that in terms of collaboration, in terms of this sharing economy that we're talking about, I think that Why Niche really is doing something interesting in just making, ensuring that every young business has access to a network of really strong mentors and advisors for them to bounce ideas off and to help with the direction of their business. So I think Why Niche is definitely a company to look out for.
Okay, so for those who don't know what Why Niche is, really, really quickly, can you just briefly give us an explanation and also the URL if you know it?
Sure, I'm going to look up the URL right now, actually. So the URL is yniche.com. And basically what yniche do is they, as it says on their website, they bring people together to solve business problems. And it's a mentoring platform, basically, where they offer, they find the right mentors to help young people grow their businesses.
Awesome. Pete, what about you?
I'm going to be really boring and go for two big brands that I think are interesting at the moment.
Okay.
We're watching a lot. So I think PBS Kids right now, when we're looking at kind of people who are doing great kids media, I think like over and over again we're referencing PBS Kids as just a best practice. I think just in terms of what they've done from a digital perspective and their programming, I think it's great, and they're winning all the awards at Kids Screen and places like that. So I think for me, like it's interesting to see how they match up against the big guys at Nick and Disney and Cartoon Network and other places. And the other one, you mentioned it a couple of times, and I should probably mention is YouTube Kids. And I think what's really interesting there is what brands do on there. So I know, for example, education is a big thing for YouTube Kids. And what I think Thomas Tank Engine are doing is they are allowing Thomas to leave Sodor and go on like a journey around the world. So it's kind of teaching geography through Thomas. And I think that kind of non-linear narrative and using digital to enhance a really great story is a really nice angle, not just replicating what exists already. I think that's kind of cool. So yes, I know they're kind of two biggies, but they're both really interesting things in my field at the moment.
It's interesting there because you just started to touch on this really interesting kind of direction that entertainment has taken, which is this kind of transmedia or multi-platform approach to storytelling. And I think it's something that is worth maybe a quick extra word or two about. Just in terms of, we see that as an emerging trend. We're seeing more and more people kind of branch out into these multiple platforms or multiple ways of sharing not just stories but characters. And obviously people like Skylanders and Disney Infinity very much kind of leading the pack on that kind of thing. What's your view in terms of the future of kind of that multiple platform or kind of bringing things to life kind of arena?
So I guess there's the commercial angle where at the moment digital is a great place to grow an audience. It's a great place to enhance an existing story, and the commercials are starting to stack up now. There's been some great breakout successes out there, but actually in terms of growing existing brands, the commercials are starting to make sense. But the underlying story for everything and any kind of transmedia or cross-platform is good characters, good narrative. And I don't think that's changed. I think that's always been the case, is you need a really good story and you need depth. And if you have that, then you can cross platforms, and kids expect you to cross platforms and adults expect you to cross platforms. And if they go to YouTube, they expect your video to be there. If they go somewhere else, they expect your game to be there. And as long as you have a good underpinning narrative, I think that works really well. The Walking Dead have kind of done that really well, I think.
Okay. So at this point in time, is there anything else that you would like to say to the big bad world out there?
What else to say? Have a lovely day, I think, is a nice thing to say at 8:30 in the morning.
We didn't need to let them know what time it was.
I know, but I think we should. I think we should be very proud of ourselves that we've come up with so many ideas. Good start to the day.
Well, thank you both for getting up at a really ridiculously early time in order to have a conversation with little old us here at Digital Jam. And once again, if you are interested in finding out more about either Peter or Gabby, you can visit Dubbit, which is dubbit.com. Peter?
Dubbitlimited.com, I think. That's pretty bad.
He's looking up his own URL.
I know, right?
While he's looking that
we're
one
such
up.
a digital agency. Dubbitlimited.com.
There we go. And Gabby is huckletree.com?
Yeah, huckletree.com.
I love it. And if you want to find out more about Digital Jam, it's digitaljamsessions.com. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Tanya.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gabby.